I was a new cop in a small town. I spent my time daydreaming about car chases and manhunts, longing for something exciting to happen. It was a little town, a nice town, but sometimes it was just downright boring. Nice people with nice neighbors living simple lives. That's what made the events of that evening so disturbing, too cruel for a town like ours to handle. Anyone who knew the Rutherfords thought they were the perfect family. They were like one of those families you'd see on TV. Steve was successful and handsome. Sally was beautiful and outgoing. The children were cute and well-behaved, which is why everyone at the station was surprised when they hauled Sally in. She seemed small, fragile even, so thin that it looked as though the cuffs she was wearing would slip right off. Silence seemed to hug her as she passed. Everyone grew quiet, and the slight stench of blood followed her. The captain stood up from his desk. "McFadden, I need you in there with me tonight," he instructed firmly, making it clear that there was no room for negotiation. I nodded my head and said nothing. Stepping into the interview room, I was riddled with nerves. I had never sat in on an interview before, let alone sat face to face with a murderer. Perhaps I should have been more careful with what I wished for. The interrogation room was cramped and uncomfortable. The light was bright and unwelcoming. Somewhere to ask hard questions and get harsh truths. Pulling back my chair, I sat down slowly, feeling as though some invisible danger lived in the room. "I'll take the lead, McFadden. You don't need to look as if you're about to lose your lunch. Take it easy," the captain said in a grumpy tone that hardly made his massive mustache move. Taking a deep breath, I felt my body unwind slightly. I was merely here to witness the conversation. Nothing would be expected of me. By the time the door opened, I felt almost completely at ease. That all changed when my eyes fell on her. Sally Rutherford was escorted into the room and placed on the opposite side of the table. She was wearing a white nightgown decorated with splashes and specks of crimson. Her hair was wild and untamed. The officer uncuffed her, and she rested her small hands on the table in front of us. Her fingers were thin and elegant. Her nails were short and stained with blood. When our eyes met, she smiled, giving me an uneasy feeling. Did she not realize the gravity of her situation? Was she not filled with remorse? How could she sit there so calmly after what she had just done? She almost looked as if she was enjoying this. Sally broke the silence with indistinguishable whispers. "I beg your pardon, Mrs. Rutherford," the captain said loudly. But we couldn't understand a single word she hissed at us. "Speak up," the captain shouted. The voices, she said, smiling broadly, "are quiet now. Finally, there is silence. But they will be back, she continued softly. "They always come back." "Mrs. Rutherford, do you know what happened tonight?" the captain asked, sounding unnaturally nervous. I had never heard the captain's voice quiver. "My family, they're dead," she answered in a monotone voice. "You admit you killed them?" the captain said. Sally smiled and nodded. The captain sat back, stunned. It was the first time that the large man seemed completely speechless. Leaning over, he whispered to me, "She needs a psych eval. I'll go make the arrangements immediately. See what you can get out of her, McFadden." I realized I was holding my breath as the door to the interrogation room shut behind the captain. I was alone with a murderer. Even though she was small and seemed rather timid, knowing what she was capable of made her terrifying. My mouth felt dry. The clock on the wall made a soft tick-tick sound. Usually it was barely audible, but it was deafening in that moment. She leaned forward and whispered, "I was just like you know, when they started. The voices started when I was about your age. For years, I could ignore them, but then I just couldn't." I sat frozen in my seat. I felt nauseous. For the first time since joining the police force, I regretted my decision. I wished I could go back to the mind-numbing boredom of just a few hours earlier. "I got the voices from my aunt on her deathbed, you see. She whispered them right into my ear, and they never went away. She was gone, but not the voices. They had more to say. They always have more to say. You can't get rid of the voices." We sat in silence for a bit. The only sound I heard was the thumping of her fingers on the table in a rhythm that made me uneasy. they still had traces of blood on them. The captain entered, seeming a bit more flustered than when he had left. "Okay, Miss Rutherford. We have someone coming in for you a bit later. In the meantime, let's get you to a cell so you can get some rest, shall we?" His voice was nervous and scared. When I looked at Sally, I could understand why. She looked different, transformed. Her eyes were filled with a deep sense of hate, and she had a sinister expression all over her face. "I told you, they always come back," she said in a deep growl. "Ah!" She leapt at the captain. Before I could blink, she was on top of him. I've never seen a woman move that quickly. Heck, I've never seen anything move with such speed. She seemed like a creature more than a person. She had him by the neck, grabbing, biting, scratching, and pulling all at the same time. The captain screamed in agony and surprise, now bleeding from the face and the neck, as I tried to pry her off of him. The door opened and 2 of my colleagues ran in to help. A single shot echoed through the room, and I felt Sally's body go heavy in my arms. We lost 2 people that night, Sally and Captain Jefferson. I drove home in silence, knowing that my life would never be the same. I'd seen too much, but it was more than that. I could hear them, at first whispers, but then louder and louder, until they turned into screams. Sally had whispered them right into me, and now the voices belonged to me, or rather, I belonged to them. I had only been driving for a few hours, but I could already feel myself starting to get tired. I left work early, eager to get away for the weekend. It had been too long since my last vacation. My girlfriend and I were set to meet at a small, rural bed and breakfast that evening. I couldn't wait to get there, but I still had a couple more hours to go. I turned up the radio in hopes that this would wake me up, but nothing seemed to interest me. It was a hot, humid summer day in the Midwest. Green fields stretched out as far as the eye could see on either side. Summer was my least favorite season. I always felt uncomfortably hot or too sweaty or a combination of the two. I tapped my fingers impatiently on the wheel, scanning the horizon for anything exciting. I drove on for a couple miles more and saw something in the distance. As I got closer, I could begin to make out the outline of a figure. Someone began waving their arms at me. It was clear that their car had broken down. My first instinct was to keep on driving. I was on a tight schedule, and who knows who this person was. They made the choice for me by standing out in the middle of the road. I eased on my brakes, stopped, and they approached. "Are you all right?" I said, rolling down my window. "Thanks so much for stopping. You're the first car I've seen in hours. Something in my engine gave out, and I can't get it started. You don't know anything about cars, do you?" I shook my head. I'd never been very handy. "Listen, I hate to ask, but is there any way you could give me a ride to the next gas station? I can't get a signal, and I have no idea where I am right now." I hesitated for a moment and scanned the man up and down. I had always been told you should never pick up a hitchhiker, that they could be dangerous. But he seemed like he was okay, and I knew that I would need help if I found myself in a similar situation. "Sure, I don't know this area too well, but I'm sure we'll find something soon." The man gave a big smile and said, "Thanks, let me grab my bag in case I can't make it back here for a while." He jogged over to his car, popped the trunk, and retrieved a black duffel bag, which he tossed carelessly into my back seat. Initially, I felt good about helping someone in a tough spot, but over time, he started to make me feel uneasy. He was fidgeting constantly, rubbing his hands together, looking behind the car and to all sides, reaching back to touch his bag and confirm it was still there. I tried to make conversation, hoping his nervousness was just a symptom of his current predicament. "So, what brings you out this way?" I asked. "My work. It takes me all over." "What do you do for work?" "A little of this and a little of that. It keeps things interesting. I like to keep moving. There's a big world out there. How about you?" "I work in an office, mostly writing reports and doing presentations. I'm too restless for something like that. Something steady, that is. Once I lose interest in something, I'm gone." "Sure," I said, feeling like the gas station couldn't come soon enough. When I asked him a question, he would never give a straight answer. It was like he was hiding something, but I had no interest in finding out what. The sooner he was out of my car, the better. Just as it was getting dark, I spotted a gas station. "There we are," I said almost too excitedly. I pulled into one of the parking stalls near the entrance. Good luck with your car, I said. He nodded without making eye contact and got out. I didn't realize how badly I needed a bathroom break until I parked. I hopped out and hurried to the men's room. After exiting, I took a moment to grab some road snacks, some water, and started walking over to my car. When I reached the door, I saw someone in the driver's seat fussing with the ignition. He was my passenger from earlier. "What are you doing?" I yelled. He ignored me and continued trying to start the car. I opened the door and tried to grab him. He pushed my face, trying to keep me away. We grappled for a moment, but eventually I got a grip on his belt and yanked him out of the car. He stumbled onto the pavement. "You're going to regret this," he muttered in a low voice. Before he had a chance to stand, I jumped into the car and locked the door. He leapt to his feet and began beating at the driver's side window. "Let me in! Let me in!" My hands were shaking, but I was able to jam my key into the ignition and get the car started. I put the car in reverse and slammed my foot down on the gas, flipped the car around, and made a break for the highway. He chased after the car screaming, but after a few moments, I was safely away. I drove in silence as I tried to calm down, taking deep breaths and focusing on the road. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and noticed I was bleeding from my nose. I wiped it quickly with the back of my hand and tried to fix my disheveled hair. After what felt like an eternity, I arrived at my destination. I parked my car, at which point I realized the hitchhiker's black duffel was still in my back seat. For a second, I panicked, but then I calmed myself down. There was no way he could find me here. I spotted a dumpster near the back of the parking area and decided that would be the best place for it. I grabbed the bag by its handles and dragged it out of the seat. It was heavier than I was expecting, like it was full of bricks. For a moment, I was tempted to look inside, but whatever my strange companion had, I wanted no part of it. I tossed it in and tried to push the whole experience from my mind. I grabbed my own suitcase from the trunk and made my way to the reception desk. "Hi, Keith Thompson checking in." "Hi, Mr. Thompson. Your girlfriend has already arrived and I think they're waiting in your room." She handed me my key and I proceeded onward. "You're here," Monica said as I walked in. Her expression changed when she saw the bruise forming on my face and the dried blood around my nostril. "Are you okay? Did something happen?" she asked. "I'm fine. Some guy was broken down and begged for a ride, so I tried to help out. He turned out to be a real nut, and he tried to steal my car and ended up attacking me." "Oh my God, did you call the police?" "I guess I didn't even think about it. I just wanted to get out of there." "I'm so sorry that happened," she said. "It's fine. I'm gonna take a shower and let's just forget about it and try to have a nice weekend." The warm water felt nice on my skin and I could feel myself starting to unwind. I toweled off, put on some comfortable clothes, and Monica gave me a tour of our space. Our second-floor room featured a king bed, a small lounge area, a 60-inch television, and a spacious private balcony overlooking miles of cornfields. The weather had cooled considerably, and we sat out on the balcony talking. As we spoke, I saw what looked like movement in the cornfield. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was probably a rabbit or a coyote. Then I saw it again, closer to the edge of the field. Then again. "Did you see that?" I said. "What are you talking about?" Monica asked. "I think there's something out there. Keith, you've had a rough day. I'm sure we're safe here." Then I could clearly see the outline of a figure standing at the edge of the field. Although I couldn't see his face, I was certain he was looking up at us. "Right there!" I shouted. "I don't see anything," she said, scanning the field, and then she saw it. "Okay, I see it too, but maybe they just have someone working late. I'm going to call the front desk. This just doesn't feel right." I picked up the phone beside the bed and dialed the front desk. I heard nothing but static. "Something's wrong with the phone. I'll just go down and talk to them." I threw my shoes on and headed down the stairs. The reception area was empty. That's normal, I thought. It's late and they've probably gone to bed. I leaned over the counter looking for a bell or some other way to call the attendant. I saw a dark liquid pooling on the floor. It was blood. I staggered backwards, my stomach already twisting itself into knots. I darted for the stairs, hoping to find some semblance of safety in my room. I was halfway back up the stairs when the lights cut out. I stood frozen for a moment, not sure of what was happening. I could make out the faint sound of heavy breathing, deep breaths in and hard exhales out. I made my way up the stairs on all fours, navigating as best I could in the dark. I found my room and retreated inside as quietly as possible. I heard Monica's voice. "What's going on?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Someone's down there and there was blood everywhere." We moved to the couch in front of the door. I tried to dial 911 on my cell phone, but I couldn't get a signal. We sat on the bed in silence, hoping for the lights to come back on or someone from the staff to tell us that everything was fine. We sat there motionless for nearly 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Then we heard a soft tapping on the door. Tap, tap. That grew louder until it became a banging, shaking the door with each blow. "Where are my things? You took my things. I can't work without my things. Let me in. I need them back." My mind went straight to the black duffel bag that I'd thrown away hours before. "We need to get out of here," I whispered. "How high is the balcony?" We moved as quietly as possible outside. "I can lower you down." Monica swung one leg over the railing, then the other. I leaned as far over as I could. "Are you ready?" I asked. She nodded with a terrified look on her face. I let go. She landed hard, but she was okay. I could hear him working on the door, trying to break it down. I didn't know how long it would hold. With shaking hands, I lowered myself down as safely as I could. As I made my descent, I heard the door give way. Then quick footsteps speed towards me. He reached over the railing, grabbing at me. I let go as his fingers grazed my wrist. I fell hard, landing awkwardly, but was miraculously unharmed. From the ground, we looked up trying to spot our would-be attacker, but he had already retreated back into the building. We darted to my car to make our escape, but the tires had been slashed and the windows broken out. We spotted Monica's car near the end of the parking lot. "He wants his bag." "What?" Monica cried. "He left his bag in my car. Maybe he'll leave us alone if he gets it." I scrambled to the dumpster and reached in, grabbing blindly for the bag. Eventually, I felt a strap and pulled hard. The bag plopped onto the pavement, spilling open. I was horrified when I saw the contents. Rusty saws and knives, a large cleaver, stained with blood and gripping onto matted pieces of hair. Along with them, I spotted a stack of driver's licenses, one from Ohio, Montana, Illinois. It appeared our attacker had been all over, preying on unsuspecting travelers. Fearing that the dark silhouette would return soon, we hustled to Monica's car. Luckily, it was untouched. As we sped away, I looked back to see the figure hunched over, stuffing his things back into the black duffel bag. It was only later that we learned of the many travelers that had gone missing over the last decade, and the legends of a mysterious, murderous traveler waiting to ambush those naive enough to pick him up. I think of him more than I would like to, especially when driving alone or at night. One thing's for certain, I will never pick up a hitchhiker ever again. People never listen. I know this well because I made this mistake many years ago. We're often drawn to danger, to excitement when we're young, aren't we? But sometimes we get too close. What happened on Wesley Street will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. They frighten me so intensely that I know I will never be rid of them. The whole town knew of the horrible death that the family in number 5 had suffered. The youngest, Sarah, was in our year at school. One day she didn't come to class, and we heard she would not be returning. Rumors of a terrifying evil in the house spread through our little village like wildfire. Bored housewives stood in supermarkets and gossiped. Teenagers shared their versions of the story while speaking in hushed tones. It was all everyone spoke about until the phase passed and everyone seemed to forget. From then on, the house remained unoccupied. I guess no one wanted a house with such a horrible history. It became worn down and dilapidated, and soon it looked out of place on Wesley Street, which was actually quite a nice neighborhood. On the last day of school, my friends and I got together to plan our adventures for the summer. Robert, John, Julian, and myself. "We should visit number 5 tonight," Robert said with a spark in his eyes. He was always looking for adventure. The rest of us didn't match his enthusiasm. "Are we even allowed to go in there?" John asked, fear apparent in his voice. "Why not? It's not like they're using it anymore," Robert responded. I wish I had the guts to speak up. The mere thought of number 5 put me on edge. But the next day, there we were, at number 5. We waited until dark to avoid being seen, and then made our approach. Julian and I were quiet, sharing a silent plea that the other would be the one to stop the madness, but neither of us said anything. Robert and John were excited to enter the premises. The gate made a long squeak as it opened, as if it were warning us to turn around and go back to where we came from, but its pleas were ignored. As we approached the house, it appeared to grow in size, casting a shadow over us that intimidated me even more. The stairs of the porch creaked and bent under our feet as we walked up. A soft howl of the wind whispered low murmurs in our ears. The door stood boldly in front of us. Spiderwebs covered the corners, and large scratches reflected in the dust. We stood there motionless, and time seemed to stand still for a while. The air around us felt electric, and the silence that hugged us felt heavy. It was Robert, of course, who leaned over to turn the knob. Pushing, he grunted. Then he tried again. "It's stuck," he said. "Okay, well, maybe we shouldn't even be here," Julian said too eagerly. Robert began to ram the door with his shoulder, and on the second try, it cracked open. The stale air from inside filled our nostrils. "Let's go," Robert said as he threw the door open. It hit the wall with a loud bang and caused all of us to jump. Robert crossed the threshold first, followed by John, then Julian, and I was the last one to step foot in that horrible house. It was dark, stuffy, and smelled off. As I walked past the wall, my fingers ran over it. It was gritty and dusty. My body felt as though it was begging me to leave. My eyes were burning slightly from the dust, and my skin felt like tiny little creatures were crawling all over it. We stepped into the middle of the foyer and stood awkwardly. The door slammed, causing John, Julian, and myself to shriek loudly. Robert burst out laughing. "Why did you do that, Robert?" John said, sounding like he was out of breath. "Come on, we're here for the full experience, aren't we?" he said with a smirk. We sat up on the floor of the living room. The room was large and quite empty. My eyes were beginning to adjust to the limited light in the room, catching sight of photos on the walls, bulky chairs covered in linen, and a dusty old fireplace. The four of us sat in a circle. Robert turned on his flashlight and placed it in the middle of us. The light made us all look strange, deformed even. "Do you guys know what happened here?" Robert said with an exhilarated tone. The rest of us shook our heads in silence. Even though we had heard the rumors, our parents didn't want us to know too much. Robert was eager to share the details. "Well, a few years ago, Mr. Anderson lost his mind, you see. There are stories of his madness, but his family ignored all the symptoms for months, until one night they woke up to the sight of him with an axe in his hand. They say the walls were soaked with blood by the time he was finished. I'm sure it was my imagination, but suddenly I smelled the familiar metallic scent of blood in the air. We were all so focused on the story that none of us noticed a sound in the background. It was Julian who heard a soft patter that he couldn't quite place. It became louder, as if it was approaching us. It became clearer as it grew in volume, sounding like a heavy object being dragged on a wooden floor. "I want to leave," Julian said, looking close to tears. "It's just an old house. They make sounds sometimes," Robert responded. He continued his story, and we all sat there, feeling the hair on our necks rise more with each passing moment. John saw it first as it stood behind Robert, a large, slender silhouette that looked like the outline of a man. John pointed with a shocked look on his face. Robert laughed and rolled his eyes, thinking that we were pulling a prank on him. I remember covering my mouth in surprise. In shock, we all sat motionlessly as the figure lifted his hands slowly. The flashlight glistened off the object he was holding, a giant axe. "If you're going to tell my story, you'd better get it right," the dark figure said with a hoarse voice. He brought the axe down hard, right into Robert. Our adrenaline started pumping, and we were on our feet before we knew it. Screaming and crying, we ran towards the door. We could hear Robert's screams of anguish as we fled, but we knew we had no choice. It was too late for him. We could only save ourselves. At least that's what I tell myself. John forced open the door, and we sped out. We ran all the way to the police station, and they listened to our hysterics with unreadable expressions. They never found Robert. They searched for him for weeks, but in the end, they gave up. His poor parents still believe that he ran away. Perhaps it's better that way. The truth can be much more painful. So please, I beg you, don't go to house number 5. Growing up, I always loved my family's trips to Emerald Lake. We would go fishing or boating or swimming. That all changed when I found him. I woke up earlier than usual, and my parents were still sleeping. I thought I would take a quick dip before breakfast, so I changed and started down the dirt path. It wasn't far, and I could see the beach in the distance. As I continued onward, I noticed something unfamiliar on the edge of the water. At first, it looked like a sack had washed up on the shore, but took shape as I got closer. I crept slowly, 1 foot at a time, feeling uneasy for a reason I did not understand. The smell was the first thing I noticed, a rotten, putrid odor that made me nauseous, which grew stronger as I got closer. Then it was right in front of me. He was laying flat on his back, still partially covered by the water. His skin was a sickly mix of pale white and discolored yellow. His t-shirt and shorts were caked with dirt and were ripped throughout. His right arm was missing just below the elbow, as was his left leg just above the knee, with only ragged stumps remaining. My eyes shifted to his face, a face that I will never forget. It looked as though something in the lake had been chewing on it. His eyelids and lips had been completely eaten away, making it look as though he was staring at me with clenched teeth. The nauseous feeling grew worse and I began to heave, eventually vomiting at my feet. Afterwards, I couldn't sleep for months without nightmares. I would close my eyes and be immediately transported back to the shore, confronted by the bloated corpse and the horrid face. When I was awake, I couldn't help wondering what had been chewing on him, what sick creature lurked in the lake. My family tried to console me, but I would not return to the lake. All the happy memories had been erased and replaced. That was 10 years ago. It was my first day back from college after completing my freshman year. My friends and I were sitting in Ben's basement, sharing stories and catching up. It was Shane, Lily, Christy, Ben, and myself. We had fun sharing stories about classes and parties. Then Christy said, "Okay, big news. My parents said we could use their cabin on Emerald Lake. It's super nice and it'll just be us." I felt a burning sensation on the back of my neck and a wave of anxious energy. For the most part, the nightmares had gone away, but every so often, I would be visited by the man from the lake and awake covered in sweat. I squirmed in my seat for a moment, just thinking about returning there. I had never told any of them about my experience there, and I did not intend to. I would just politely decline, and that would be the end of it. "Oh, and would you be able to drive us?" Christy said, looking at me. I froze for a second. I realized that of the group, I was the only one with my own car. "I don't know," I stuttered. I'm really busy this summer, and I wouldn't want to hold you up." "That's okay. We can do it any time, so whatever works for you." I tried to come up with another excuse, but I couldn't. I just nodded my head and said sure. 3 weeks later, we arrived at the cabin. It was a large wooden structure with its own private dock not more than 100 feet from the front door. We unloaded the car, dropped our belongings in the cabin, and made our way to the dock. Every step I took felt heavy and uncomfortable. Ben and Shane dove in from the dock, and Lily and Christy soon followed after. I felt the dock creak with each step. It seemed sturdy, but I didn't trust it. "Are you coming in?" Shane asked. "I'm alright for now. I'm pretty worn out from the drive," I replied. He nodded, and I was more or less forgotten as they swam about and splashed in the water. I'm just being silly, I thought to myself. I'm not going to let an accident from a decade ago ruin my trip. I slipped off my shoes, rolled up my pants, and slowly dipped my feet into the water. It was pleasantly warm. I don't need to get in all the way, I thought. I can just enjoy the water like this. "Ah!" I yelled. Something grabbed my ankle and yanked hard. I slipped off the dock and splashed into the water fully clothed. My head dipped under the water and I began to flail wildly. I felt my lungs burn as I gasped, accidentally swallowing the water. I swam blindly, feeling for the dock. Once I felt it, I pulled myself out, coughing violently. I sat there drenched and heard Ben laughing. "That's not funny," Christy said pointedly. "Come on, it's just a joke," Ben said. I looked down at the dock and pulled myself as far away from the edge as possible. "I'm gonna change into some fresh clothes," I said softly, and made my way back to the cabin. "Wait up," Lily called after me. "Hey, I'm sorry about Ben." "It's fine. I'm just a little nervous around water. I'm gonna take a moment and I'll catch up with you all later." She nodded, forcing a smile with sad eyes. A few hours later, we set up for dinner. Shane and I got a fire going, and we sat around it roasting hot dogs. "Have you all heard the stories about Emerald Lake?" Ben asked. We shook our heads. "They say that something ancient lives here at the deepest depths of the lake. Hundreds of years ago, there was a river connected to this lake that ran all the way to the ocean. Something swam up it and got stuck somehow. Now it waits under the water, dragging anyone unlucky enough to cross its path down to the bottom of the lake. Every year, people go missing here. People say they drown, but their bodies are almost never recovered. And when they are, it looks as though something has taken bites out of them." My blood ran cold and my heart started racing. I thought again of the man on the beach, the missing limbs, and his chewed-up face. "That's so dumb," Christy said. "There's nothing out here but fish, and that's if you're lucky." "Well, it looks like I scared at least one of you," Ben said as I stared down at my feet. "Oh my God, Ben, why are you like this?" Lily said. We ate and sat there for a while, chatting. "Anyone up for a night swim? The water should be about perfect," Shane said. "That sounds fun," Christy replied. Ben nodded his head with a smile. "I think I'm spent for today. Maybe tomorrow," Lily said. "Same here," I said, shaking my head. A few moments later, they departed for the water. Lily and I sat there for a while, enjoying the fire, and then eventually turned in. It wasn't until I was in my bed that I realized how exhausted I was. The sun had a way of zapping my energy. I fell asleep quickly, but was plagued by dreams of the man on the beach, haunted by images of his missing limbs and dead eyes upon me. I awoke abruptly. The clock on the wall read 3 a.m. It was clear I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep, so I got dressed and went down to the kitchen to find something for a late-night snack. Lily had fallen asleep in a chair in the living room and woke up to the sounds of me rummaging through the fridge. "Sorry," I said. "Just looking for something to eat." "That's okay. I was waiting for the others to get back, but I guess I dozed off." "They aren't back yet?" I asked. "Maybe we just didn't hear them," Lily said. We checked the rooms only to find empty beds and suitcases. "This doesn't seem right. We should go check on them," she said. We headed down the path to the dock, not sure what to expect. The moon was bright in the sky, and it was eerily quiet. We reached the dock, and on a distant sandbank, we could see Christy and Ben. "Hey!" I called out. "Are you okay?" When they heard us, they began to shout frantically, waving for us to approach. We couldn't make out most of what they were saying, only comprehending bits and pieces, but we could distinctly hear both pleas and help. "We need to get out to them," Lily said. There was an old rowboat on the side of the dock. Lily stepped in and turned back, waiting for me to follow. I stood at the edge of the dock, frozen. "Come on," Lily said. "They need our help." I stepped in, and I could feel the boat shifting under my weight. I sat between the oars, and Lily untied us. I began rowing, trying my best to just look at the boat's floor. I couldn't bear the thought of the cold black abyss around us. Push forward and pull back. Push forward and pull back. Just focus on the rowing, I thought. We'd be there soon enough. "We're almost there," Lily said. Then we felt something push on the bottom of the boat, shaking it. What was that? Maybe just a rock? Then it came again, this time from another direction, tilting the boat to one side. I kept rowing as fast as I could, desperate to make it to land. Then I felt the boat raise up like something massive was pushing up on us. It lifted up the nose of the boat until Lily and I both tumbled out, splashing into the water. At first I was disoriented, struggling to gather my bearings. I found the water's surface and spotted the sandbank. I looked for Lily, but I couldn't see her. I mustered as much courage as I could and dove under the water's surface, searching blindly for her. I forced my eyes open under the water, but it was too dark to see. I searched for as long as my lungs would allow me. When I surfaced, there was no sign of her. I swam as quickly as I could to the sandbank. Christy and Ben were frantic. "Where's Lily?" Christy asked. "She fell in the water with me, but I couldn't find her." "Shane's missing too," she cried. "Something's out there," Ben said. "We were swimming and it just pulled him down." As we stood there talking, we heard movement in the water behind us. Something huge and terrible began to emerge from the water. At first, it was too dark to see, but as it crept closer, we could see more and more of it. It had a long neck that led to a mouth full of teeth. It had many strange appendages that were somewhere between feet and fins. Its skin was pale and loose, with slick, saggy folds. Once ashore, it looked awkward, but moved surprisingly swiftly on land. All of a sudden, it was upon us. We turned to run and could hear its terrible footsteps behind us. We scattered, trying to find the edges of our tiny refuge on the sandbar. Christy was the unlucky one, and it charged her. It swung its large neck down to the ground and trapped her foot in its toothy maw. She screamed as it hoisted her into the air. I reached out and took hold of her hand, but the creature was too strong. With a flick of its neck, it threw me off. I could only watch as it receded into the dark water, dragging Christy with it. "What do we do now?" Ben said. I don't know, I replied. "We need to help them." "How? That thing's huge and we have nothing." But nothing. We can either wait for morning and hope it doesn't come back for us, or we can swim for it." "What? There's no way I'm getting back in the water with that thing in there," I said. "Do what you like, but we're helpless on this island. I'm not waiting for it to decide that it's still hungry." I hated it, but I knew he was right. We waded into the water, and I took one last look at the dock in the distance before diving under. I swam as fast and as hard as I could. Part of me expected to be dragged under the water immediately, but as I made more and more progress, I allowed myself to believe that I would make it. Eventually, I felt the soft sand on the shore and pulled myself onto the beach. I stood on the dock for nearly an hour. Ben was not as lucky.